We've got an update on James's story from last week with the instant karma lady who went flying through, tried to grab a MAGA hat and tripped over.
Let's have a look here for those who didn't see it here. Here's what happened on a New York City subway about a week or so ago. Have a watch this.
He won. People like you. That's why he won. That is why he won, because of people like you need to stop it. Let him live.
Bro, just like, chill, bro.
You're okay with that? He's a racist.
How can I be racist?
He's a racist. If you voted for Trump, you're a racist.
Alright, well, this is my stuff. I hope you enjoy the hat.
And down she goes. Look, we've got an update on this story here because that woman has been identified, and you're not going to believe this here, as a creative director.
And awful.
Right? A creative director
And awful.
for a number of big luxury brands that you would have heard of. So, you know, very nice for her to deign to take the subway and then try.
Well,
but also, she's also an Italian-American citizen, and I don't dual national. I don't think she voted for Maloney. Just me.
Well, yeah, she's what we were talking about previously, that awful phenomenon, affluent, white, female, liberal, as they call
Urban
them,
liberal.
lefty. And she was literally felt entitled to chase that poor boy on the platform, try to physically take that hat off him. And, yeah, that piece of instant karma was delicious. But, yeah, she works for brands like Tiffany's, so very high-end, very affluent. But a point you made there about Afghanistan, which shocks me that the media still after this did not try to hold the Biden administration accountable. Because remember, they had an airstrike in the aftermath of that to supposedly kill those who were responsible. And they killed a aid worker and his young family. There was, I think, 6 or 7 young children who were murdered wrongly, and they acknowledged they got it wrong, and yet again nobody lost their job. Nobody. This is a picture of some of the children who were killed in that airstrike, and to this day no one has lost their job other than possibly President Biden after
they're all upset about the signal chat.
They're all upset about the
forget
signal
about
chat. And, you know,
Afghanistan.
look, the signal chat was, you know, incautious, and whoever added that Jeffrey Goldberg guy from The Atlantic really should, you know, be cashiered, because that is absolutely inexcusable. Because here's the thing, you know, the Trump administration is about bringing America back to responsibility and people taking responsibility for their mistakes. So there needs to be some accountability on that, but it's not a hanging offense for the whole administration. Let's put that aside. You know, remember though, like, the history of this, when America, you know, was the great nation that Donald Trump wants to get it back to, you know, after Pearl Harbor, President Franklin Roosevelt fired the general who was in charge of the Pacific. Said, this happened on your watch, you're out. What happens after Afghanistan? Well, everybody rallies around, you know, Mark Milley and everybody else and the Pentagon and says, oh, look, all of these, you know, people who are all doing all the diversity stuff in Washington, that hasn't distracted them from their main mission, when, of course, it clearly has. And there's been no accountability. This is what the Trump administration needs to do. It needs to bring back responsibility for these things.
And they can start by firing that Steve Witkoff bloke. He seems to be a complete joke. But anyway, that's a different story. I want to talk about the Middle East briefly, Rita. We've seen these demonstrations in Gaza from some very brave individuals who are protesting, Gazans protesting against Hamas. The media doesn't fit the media narrative, so the media is barely touching it. We're not seeing the demonstrations on the streets of Sydney or the Opera House supporting these characters against Hamas, which is what we should be doing, and our politicians should be encouraging this. Because what's going to happen? Only one of two things. Either Hamas is going to wipe these characters out, or, as I passionately hope, Hamas is on the point of being wiped out and is now so weakened that people in the Gaza Strip feel emboldened to turn against them. But what we don't want to see is a situation where Hamas remains in power and we end up with so-called elections and Hamas re-wins. So that's got to be avoided at all costs. The West needs to be getting behind these people if it's legitimate and encouraging any kind of dissent against Hamas.
It's interesting that after, 18 months of protests, pro-Palestinian protests, we haven't seen a single one that I'm aware of in the West that is anti-Hamas.
I know.
That is pro-Palestinian but anti-Hamas, because as we know, Hamas are absolutely brutal Islamist terrorists, and the way they treat their own, the way they treat those who they think have defied their orders is absolutely sadistic. So that we don't see that at all.
No.
It says plenty.
But this, to me, James, this is Donald Trump's vision for Gaza coming to life. Donald Trump said people would voluntarily leave. Now, if Hamas is defeated, we're going to see people like that voluntarily leaving, and some will voluntarily come back after Gaza is restored.
I think we also need to be careful, though, because, how many times in the Middle East in the last
Iran,
20 years?
I know.
Remember the Iranian Revolution, Rita, you know about this, started out looking like it was a liberalizing movement. And of course, the liberals gave way to Khomeini.
When the left and the Islamists get together, it never ends well.
Yes, the students and the Islamists.
But you've got, I have been researching this, and there's terrible report that one of the leaders of these protests in Gaza has been tortured and killed by Hamas. So, of course, we knew that's going to happen. There is some question about who's actually backing these protests. The PLO might be behind them as well.
You've got to be suspicious.
There's not going to be any peace there until there's an actual occupation by some sort of multinational force.
No, by Israel. You need Israel to occupy it, and you need Hamas wiped out. That's what we need to see.
You need Hamas wiped out.
Yeah, and that can only happen with an Israeli occupation. But the real story was what happened to Iran in the so-called Green Revolution, where the West stood back and the poor people of Iran
that was Obama.
were terrorised and lost. Yeah,
let's talk. No
yes. Anyway, want to talk briefly. Let's have a bit of humour. I've got to have some more humour. Kamala Harris always provides humour, but guess what? She's coming to Australia to provide some humour for us. Now, I don't know if this is a joke or someone's done this as a spoof or whatever, but the claim is on Instagram that Kamala Harris is going to talk at some Queensland real estate function later in the year.
Is it April Fool's already?
It could be April Fool's.
Early April
But can you?
Fool's
I can just imagine the speech. Towers on the Gold Coast, unburdened by what could have been and burdened by what we see.
Maybe this is what Kamala Harris should be doing. She should become, a real estate agent. She should be out there every Saturday flogging houses.
Venn diagrams.
Saying, here's a Venn diagram of what you could do to this living room. The living room and the dining room are Venn diagramming together. This property is unburdened by what has been in terms of heritage restrictions. There's so many ways that Kamala Harris could go with this.
I do hope she comes out, Rita. That would be so much fun.
Hilarious. I really do hope this story is true, but I
just can't
imagine a real estate institute of any sort of description, because real estate agents are typically self-employed types. They normally care about economic management. So to have her come and share her word salads doesn't really make sense.
It's a building. A building is a building. It's where they build a building and you buy the building. Anyway, we can have lots of fun with Kamala Harris for hours.